Abandoned buildings can hold a deep fascination, even when they're mere empty shells that only hint at the many lives once lived and perhaps lost within them. They provide a rich seam of opportunities for photographers or those who are simply curious, as well as offering a rare, uncurated, and first-hand experience of history that cannot be found within carefully labeled and supervised museum exhibits or books. They also whisper to us about the temporary nature of our own lives and perhaps even our whole civilization by so clearly reminding us that everything from our grandest constructions to our beloved homes will, just like these buildings, eventually give in to the ravages of time and be slowly reclaimed by nature. However, they can be even more fascinating when some of the things from their often rich and fascinating pasts are left behind after abandonment. As we shall see in the following entires, these can sometimes provide either interesting or deeply macabre insights into the building's past, sad or melancholy reflections on the aspirations once held by those who built them or lived in them, and occasionally even perplexing mysteries which defy any obvious explanation. And the Crimea. Dating back to 1833, State Brigid's Asylum in Ireland is among the oldest surviving examples of such buildings. Designed in a prison-like radial plan from grim gray stone, by the 1920s, it was grossly overcrowded, designed for 840 patients, but holding almost 1,500. Like all good mysteries, the crane mirror posed some intriguing questions. Standing alone in an otherwise unremarkable room, with its strange seashell motif and intricate dancing carved wooden cranes, it stood around 12 feet, 3.65 meters, tall and suggested something perhaps more at home in a ballet school. But in the 19th century, and within a lunatic asylum, that explanation seemed most unlikely. Larger than any door or window in the room. One wonders how they even managed to get it in there. But more intriguingly, why even go to such trouble? Was it some strange passion project installed at the request of a former medical superintendent? Could there really have been ballet classes in an asylum? Was it a part of some strange type of therapy? Perhaps it covered up a doorway or something else now hidden behind it? And if so, what? No satisfactory answer has yet been found. The Spree Park Dinosaurs, what was once Eastern Europe's largest amusement park, opened in East Berlin, Germany in 1969. In 1991, Spree Park Planterwald was bought by a man formerly convicted of the manslaughter of 7 people in a carousel accident a decade earlier. He had cleverly used his wife's name on the purchase documents to avoid detection and would not have been permitted to buy or run such an attraction otherwise. While, thankfully, no more disasters occurred, by 2001, the park's fortunes were failing and it was 11 million euros in debt. Several of the rides were shipped to Peru to be repaired, but on the return journey, the Magic Carpet ride, of all things, was found to be stuffed full of cocaine with an estimated street value of around $17 million. Several of those involved, including the owner's son, received long sentences in a grim Peruvian prison, and that signaled the end of the once bustling and popular Spree Park. Most of the rides and other attractions remained, including a Ferris wheel and pirate ship, all gradually becoming overgrown and taking on a haunting and magical air. These doubly extinct dinosaurs were among the numerous bizarre mementos left behind after the park closed. Anderlecht Veterinary College in Brussels was built in 1912 in a pretty Belgian neo-Renaissance style, but left abandoned in 1991 when the whole campus moved location to the eastern Belgian town of Liège. The various buildings, which once contained pens for cattle and cages for primates and other mammals, were gradually converted, but one remained empty long after the others. Upstairs was a grand lecture hall, complete with rows of plush, red theater-like chairs, while beautiful marble staircases and brass banisters adorned the other floors. Down in the basement, however, lurking in a dark and long disused room, were hundreds of macabre specimens of animals preserved in glass jars. Baby pigs, cows, and even parts of dogs, cats, and horses were among them. Jawbones, internal organs, and some whole animals all waited to greet any unsuspecting explorer, their glassy, faded eyes staring out through the yellowish tint of formaldehyde. Some were smashed and lay rotting on tables and floors, making for a truly bizarre and disturbing sight, especially down there in the darkness. Dental training heads. The main part of Peterborough District Hospital was built in the late 1960s, in the brutalist concrete style so typical of its era. It served the city for around 50 years, but closed in 2010 when a new site was opened. Any equipment thought to be worth keeping was sold on to countries in Eastern Europe. But for a while, everything inside sat gathering dust and awaiting a new fate. The hospital made for a strange explore, as certain areas, including the mortuary and boiler house, remained open and busy, while areas such as the once bustling reception and cafeteria sat empty and quiet, the faint smell of food and disinfectant still hanging in the air from before its recent closure. Among the strange machines, bedding, bedpans, and nurses' clothing left behind were these rubber training heads, used for dental and facial injury training, but looking for all the world like some horror from another dimension, attempting to enter our own. The training dummy. This Italian asylum, or manicomio, opened in 1876, and although designed by its first superintendent with the care and cure of its patients in mind, eventually housed around 1,500 patients in increasingly grim conditions. Little was removed after its full closure in 1998, with beds, x-rays, medical equipment, and official records all still lying around for anyone to see. The pleasant landscaped grounds became overgrown, wood began to rot, and paint began to peel away from the walls as all the old asylums were closed down and care for patients with mental health conditions moved into the community and smaller, more local hospitals. This CPR training dummy sat alone and waiting in a quiet, darkened room just off a corridor, and ironically was enough in itself to give any unsuspecting explorer heart palpitations and breathless nightmares upon its discovery. Floor buffer wedding. West Park Asylum in Surrey, UK. Opened in 1924 and hosted 25,445 patients at its peak. Planned to open in 1916, it was immediately taken into use as a Canadian war hospital, but when the First World War ended, it reverted to serving London County as planned. It was part of a cluster of 5 huge asylums, all within walking distance of each other, covering over a mile, 16 km of ground, and housing up to 9,000 patients between them. After the official closure in 2003, although many areas had been shut down and disused over 20 years earlier, a set of fire extinguishers, vacuum cleaners, and these floor buffers regularly toured the building, arranged by unseen forces into different scenes and patterns each time. Although amusing, some might think a little disturbing to consider the time and effort involved in moving them all here and arranging them in such a way. The PT-76 Russian tank, RAF Upward in Cambridgeshire, began life as a military airfield in 1917 and grew to become a large and fully established Royal Air Force base during the lead-up to the Second World War, where it played a key role in defending Britain during German attacks. It was later used by the USAF from 1981 until its final closure in 1994. The site was huge and featured aircraft hangars, runways, staff accommodation, canteens, a recreation hall, a water tower, underground bunkers, a firing range, air raid shelters, and even a jail, although during its later years only sheep wandered among its empty, stripped-down buildings. The whole site held quite a few odd surprises, but it was still a very unexpected sight to see this abandoned Russian PT-76 amphibious tank sitting lifelessly guarding a building at the center of the site. Patient brain samples back to West Park Asylum again, and this time to the abandoned mortuary and pathology labs, which sat nestled among the trees in a corner of the site. It had once been tucked away behind the asylum's chapel, but that was demolished back in the 1980s to make way for a staff car park. Being home to up to 45 patients, death visited the asylum regularly, and the mortuary fridges had room for up to 12 bodies to be stored at any one time. One could wander the shabby, abandoned wards of the asylum after closure and read the old logbooks that describe patients dying in the night or after a fall or injury. Blood and tissue samples were taken from some patients and stored in boxes or on glass slides, including these chunks of brain sealed in paraplast blocks, a waxy paraffin-based substance, for later study. Being unmarked, no one now knows who they once belonged to, what they died of, or what lessons might have been learned from them. Any that remained would have been eventually thrown away in skips or burned along with all the other fascinating artifacts this vast asylum once contained.